Good morning, everyone. It's Faith and Fun with Donna on Saturdays. Hopefully posting at 12 p.m., barring any difficulties with technology. So bear with me, because sometimes it doesn't quite work out, the uploading thing. But I wanted to talk to you about the road to Emmaus, and then what kind of artwork could we make, what could we create that would help us to see the story. How could we tell the story with bits of artwork? So this isn't a full-fledged painting. We're using ink, pens, and like something you would have around the house, a black ink pen, and colored pencils. So these are just Crayola colored pencils. So a quick review of the story. Jesus has died. He has risen from the dead. The disciples already know that. They found that the tomb was empty. We went over those stories in the past couple weeks. So we're still in the Easter season. And on the same day as the resurrection, two disciples are on the road away from Jerusalem. They left. They're very sad. So Scripture says they're downcast. They're not sure what they're going to do. They're somewhat lost. So they left Jerusalem, probably afraid also that something bad might happen to them too. They might get arrested. But this man meets them on the road, right where they are. So we want to remember, that God will enter in, or he'll send someone to enter in. So they don't really know who this man is, but he says, "What's happening? What's wrong?" And they said, "Don't you even know what's happened?" That Jesus, their rabbi, had been arrested and crucified, and now he'd risen from the dead. A couple of the elements that I thought were very important to show were the disciples on the road to Emmaus. I put a sign so we know what we're talking about, what story we're doing, where they're going, where they're headed. We have three men on the road. We assume they're men. I mean, everybody is kind of dressed in those tunic-like coverings with cloaks at that time. But we could tell that this guy has a beard for sure. So we know that they're guys. And we can also see them over here. So I used the same colors to identify the two disciples that were on the road. So you could see that they went from here to here. And we have those elements connecting them together in the story of our storyboard here. I'm going to assume in this situation that this drawing is Jesus who enters in the road. And you can also see that he's moving because you could see the bottom of his shoe. And those details in drawing are somewhat hard to get the idea of. We'll talk a little bit about how to draw those in simple ways after we talk about the picture and talk about coloring it and some of the things that we can do to show light and blending. But so we have the two guys and Jesus entering in, and his hand is kind of like talking, like he's talking with his hands. Did you know? And this guy to me almost looks like he's asking a question, like inquisitive. He's trying to figure out what's happening. So body language can tell part of the story also. I also thought like Jesus's head is leaned in. Now I used a couple of clip art examples to get me started. And then I kind of adapted them for what was happening in my story. So I didn't create this all on my own. I looked at a bunch of clip arts or coloring pages to get ideas of what I'd like to do. So this is the compilation that I started, or I ended up with, not what I started with, but what I ended up with. So we have that, and I'll explain the hearts at the end. But so they're on the road. They, after Jesus explains the scriptures and tries to tell them how the Messiah was foretold and that this man was him, they say, "Will you stay with us for the night?" And in that, they go to break bread, and all of a sudden, they realize it's Jesus. So we know this is Jesus because remember when we talk about our holy people, the Holy Family, angels, they all have this like halo around them. So we know that these are our two guys by the coloring. And then also that Jesus is there because he looks sort of like Jesus. And I was going to say that when I did the example, my starting point of my storyboard, I had this sketch that I found on the internet, some ideas about what Jerusalem might look like, and then this one, which I can show you I did in marker the other day, and you could see Jesus to me is depicted sort of like an icon. So I feel like this is an icon, a drawing of an icon from somewhere, but I don't know where. So when I did it, I decided I would go with a more Jesus-like drawing, and that was because we had just done the Divine Mercy picture, and I had tried to copy the Divine Mercy painting. So I tried to make his hair and face look a little bit more like the painting looked. So hopefully you could see that here. And he's breaking bread, and they all have plates. So we know that it's implied that he's sharing. Their hands are up, and they're not perfect hands, so don't worry about it if you don't have perfect hands. The idea here is that we're telling the story, not doing a perfect painting, which would take a lot more time, you know. So this is an exercise of entering into the story and looking at things, but don't worry too much about how perfect your drawing is. And of course, I did send you, or I did post on the Facebook page, blue drawing like I have been doing, because if you print it in blue, the blue will disappear in your picture. Now for this picture, I did outline everything with a pen, and I'll just show you, like, it's one of these pens that has like a soft point on it so that you could use it on a pad or something. But this pen I kind of liked, and I can explain what happens when you use pen, but I still think outlining it in the pen is a good way excuse me, to practice drawing. So we have them entering into this dinner and saying, you know, to this man, will you stay with us and continue to talk with us? So I'm sure that he brought them hope and peace. So they wanted him to say, and then when he breaks the bread, we realize that it's Jesus. So we want to remember that this story is definitely reminding us that in the breaking of the bread, in the Eucharist, Jesus is there. He's actually present. And wherever two or more are gathered, that's one of our scriptures, he's there. So Jesus is present, especially if we're talking about him. So after this experience, they go back to Jerusalem and they tell everyone. Now, I looked for a good Jerusalem picture. There were some sketches out there and different ways to do this, but I really like the way that this came out. I sort of looked at different buildings and drew from what I could see on my computer and just made some lines, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. So going straight to the drawing, I have my jar here. I love using jars. See, this is pickles. Some of them I have like the paper taken off, but this is the one that I was using. So when I color, I sit and watch TV or whatever, I actually have my pencils in a jar next to me, and I can use my handy clipboard as my drawing board or whatever. So I thought I'd show you at first the ink drawings I did, which I used my light board, and you could use a window if you needed to do your drawing in pencil and then go back over it with a better line with your pen. You could do that on a window even, as long as it's sunny outside or bright enough. You could do that, or you could use a kid's light board, whatever, to do your tracing, drawing, and I'll do another video with tracing paper or whatever. So this one, I just wanted to like kind of mention, I'm going to use my pen, that a lot of times I wasn't sure about this guy, and he changed a little bit in my picture as I went along, but I did a couple drawings, very simple here, to talk about the different ways that we can shade or use line markings to help us see the movement in the picture. So as you can see right now, this is his shoe, which is really just kind of an oval, maybe like a jelly bean. And then like a heel in the shoe. So that's not too hard. When we look at drawing figures, you'll see that, and I couldn't do much about this shadow thing, so I hope you can see it well, that we'll do like, where's the head? Where's the shoulders? So then you do this rectangle. If he's moving, this is his leg and hips. So this leg is going down. We don't see his foot because it's behind here. But when you draw a figure, this is where you get started. So you can't even see, like, his hand isn't here yet. And we're only going to see the side of his hand when he's walking and talking because he's not holding his hand out like that. So you don't need even like all the fingers there. So this guy's head is right here. His shoulders are here. He's sort of turned looking at Jesus and walking along. We don't see his legs because of his cloak. And this guy, his head is turned this way. So we want to give him a little bit of a face. We want to give him a little bump out for his nose, and I gave him a beard. And his arm is turned, so he's turned toward Jesus. So we don't see that full rectangle like we see here for their body shapes and the way that they're walking. We don't see that exactly, but you could tell that this is like your side view then. He's turned looking at Jesus as he's talking. Our little signpost is so simple because it's just like a rectangle and then put a point on it. You can use a ruler if you want, but actually in drawings it's way more interesting not to have a straight line, a boxed out ruler kind of drawing. This kind of makes you enter in. So anytime you do a squiggle, and we did this on the 3 crosses picture too, on the way to the cross with just shading and color to draw someone into the scene. So we do definitely have some points that we want to talk about here, but the real main point is happening over here. So we want to draw people with our composition into what is the point. And you might think it's a little bit different, that the main part of the scene that I want you to know, there's 2 main points, is really, this is the main one. So it's drawing you in and out. So we have action in the picture for our eyes to follow. And then these hearts here are a main thing. So you might think that we should make this the center of the picture, but really that's not as interesting, and it's not really telling the story. We could go from there and put pictures behind it, like a flashback. But for the purpose of our drawing, this is what I wanted to do in order to teach with the picture. So I could have put another Jerusalem behind here, or a sign that says Jerusalem went that way, but really the main point is that I wanted to tell you that they went on this journey. They were on the road and what happened. So you have the beginnings of our drawing here. Now I added more of it so you could see. So if you have your blue picture and you printed it out, you could follow along or just take your time to draw each of these shapes as we go. So now you see that this one has a lot more detail in here that shows more shadow. Here in this picture, I started adding more lines. So we went from this is empty to putting the heart, and this is actually a flame. I know it's hard to tell, but the idea was that you drew a heart, a shape that we all know, not like an anatomical heart, and a flame with a little light in the middle of it. So we're showing this heart and flame on the 2 disciples as they're walking. Because in Scripture, at the end of that Scripture from Luke, we hear that didn't they realize that their hearts were burning within them? When he was speaking, everything rang true. It all made sense now. And if you've ever had that where, oh my gosh, I finally get it, you have this feeling in your heart or your chest where you're like very happy and you're on fire. You're like, oh my gosh, I got to tell somebody that I figured it out. So that's what this is here, because while he's talking, their hearts are burning. And hopefully you get that feeling when you hear Scripture, or it starts to make sense. So then we moved over to our drawing, and you could trace all of those things. Do your best with the finger lines. And I was thinking that it might seem like hard to think about, but he's holding the bread. So really it's just this shape in his sleeve. And then you just do a line, a line, a line. Very simple anatomical drawing for this kind of artwork. It doesn't have to be perfect. And the other thing I was thinking, which is harder to see, is like the eyebrows. There's the eyebrows, and you make like a dot and then do this little eyelid thing, and that is enough. Not perfect, but that's enough to tell someone that this is a face. So that's the bottom of the nose, and the mouth is just a line, and then his beard. So we want to do some shading, not perfect, but some shading to put in that idea of the beard and the mustache. And all we need really in artwork is a hint, because your brain will fill in all of the details also. So to look at the way that we shade things, so if this is under his arm and this is shadowed because the light is up here, we can add those things. And this shows that his cloak or tunic is moved to the side because his leg is moving. So that gives us movement. Even though we didn't do all of that for the other ones, we have the hint of movement there. So when you look at the picture, keep all of those things in mind and try not to worry too much about being perfect. Because if you blew this up and you were doing just his face, it would be way easier to put in details. But this will give you an idea of how to draw a face. And you can learn that by just practicing. So using those squares to figure out which way is their body moving. How can I make it look like something's happening in the picture? Or even with them holding their hands up, which my fingers are not perfect. I have to say that this was my favorite part, the building, and I put this sign in, which I didn't fill in, because I want you to come up with something. So if you read the story, or if you wanted to put in the message that you want to remember from this story, I didn't put one here because I was torn between two. Two of the most important things was that Christ was present and our hearts were burning. So this scripture says, stay with us. So I was always thinking like, well, I want to put like, stay with us here. You could do that. I thought about putting our hearts were burning in this sign because to me, this aha moment, this feeling of knowing that Christ enters into your story and he's right there with you trying to help you through it, even if you're sad and you can't look up, which is something I talked about in our Wednesday video, this idea of staying positive and having hope because that's what the resurrection was about. That's always a good idea. So what could you put in this sign? What's the message that you want to remember out of this story? Maybe you want to put more in here. Maybe you want to do like a little graffiti artwork with words or believe or hope, whatever you want to put in the story. And you could put captions anywhere you want to, because this is more of a cartoon drawing or a comic strip than it is a painting, where maybe we don't want to put words in. Okay, so I wanted to say that I took a book. You could do this yourself. If you have a, I'm going to use my Magnificat. If you had a book, you could even use this as your ruler. When I started, I did this box with the ruler, and then I thought, well, gosh, it looks like a box if you put in a text box in a document, and I didn't want it to look like that. And then I thought I wanted it to look like more like a sign. So all I did was create a line here and then sort of sketch the lines going across and not have it perfect. the perfect thing was not the point. To me, I wanted it to look like this is a drawing, a thought process or whatever. So put something in your sign if you want, whatever you would like. And to keep in mind that after they met Jesus in the breaking of the bread, after they realized who he was and their hearts were burning within them, they went back to Jerusalem and they told the disciples and the apostles what happened. So there are a lot of stories where Jesus appears to people in Scripture, in Luke, in Acts, that we're going to talk about as we go. To give dimension to Jerusalem, I started with just this box, and I didn't go down all the way because I wanted the buildings to look like they were in front of each other. So I started with this one, and I wanted a dome. I like the idea of the dome. That's another story. So I put a little steeple kind of thing on there. I don't know what that is. And to get this rounded look, we're making a dome, like an upside down big smile. I don't know. And then to make it look like it's architecturally round, like it's coming out at you, you wouldn't draw a straight line, but a rounded line on the bottom. So you could do that and make it look more 3D. Now it changes the position. But since this was like a sketch of buildings that are not perfect, and when you're drawing, this is one of the things I love about drawing, you can fix your lines by just making them thicker. You give more dimension to the picture. You can put in shadows like I just did here. Now it looks like there's a shadow there. Draw the arch of the doorway. I didn't even finish this. Like you could finish it if you wanted. Give it some land in front of it. But to draw these shapes, they're all just rectangles and stuff. So if you wanted to do just an ink drawing, this is kind of like architectural lines on the front of the building. You could just color in the little window things in this dome tower with your ink pen. Remember to go, I'm going to turn it to the side. Remember to angle like the shape of your dome. So you want to like keep it from being a straight line, because if you did this, it would not look shaped like a dome. Then you could, through side hatching, make it look like, and I've done this for you in with pencil, but so I'll show you that also with pencil. For that, I just used black and brown, so I'm going to do it on these. If I did the inside of the doorway brown, and I just quickly colored it, it's not like a perfect coloring. I'm going to try and zoom in for you. It's not like perfect going around the edges. I just did like lines going the other way. And then to make it look dimensional, I can do the end, one side, darker, and create a shadow, and now it creates depth. Like you can see that there's this shadow. So you can see with the ink what we did, and then with the two colors. One of the other things I wanted to show you in this picture, I used a dark green for this. And you might think, well, it looks lighter here, or this is a different color. All it is letting the paper, the white of the paper, show through. So here we are with the shadow to create the domes. So I put a little darker brown under here. I made this orange and brown so that you could get some depth of color and dimension to it. This is orange and brown here, and this is yellow and brown. The more that you color it, the deeper and the more full your color would be. So if I wanted to add to this spot, if I was doing this one, and I started at the bottom, if you use little circles, you get better coverage and you don't have that line. Like you see the lines here, and you could see lines here. You won't have that line if you do little circles. So I did around the bottom and around the sides, and I left this spot open here so it would be like light. like the light is hitting the top of the dome. And then you could color in the rest of it. So this is light. And I'm just doing like diagonal shading for this. And you leave some of the white of the paper to show through. And even, you know, this is like a painterly thing or a sketchy thing. You could even leave it where it's not actually all colored. Or you could take your yellow or white and color this in and go right over the green. And now you've got like a full, smooth, more blended color. And then you could go over it again and you can see how it will fill in. So now you have the illusion of light, and I almost covered it with the green, but you could still see the yellow in it, and it gives the building more texture. Sorry about that, I was off screen. It gives the building more texture if you cover this a little bit. So I thought that that was a great way to look at the light. When I did Jesus' hair, just like when I did Jesus' hair in the Divine Mercy painting, when I did the colored pencil picture, I put in the orange and yellow highlights first. So I'm going to show you that here. I'm going to put in some orange here, some orange here to give some depth of color because it wouldn't be just brown. But in that painting, we had yellow highlights here. So you're like, oh my gosh, she just colored Jesus' hair yellow and orange. Great, right? It doesn't make any sense because his hair isn't yellow and orange. So, and then I went over it, and in the shadows next to his neck, I made that shadow a darker brown. I colored it more there, but I colored over this and smoothed out those colors together, blended them together with my brown, but you could still see the yellow and the orange through it. And now this gives his hair more dimension. So you could see that. More dimension here. I went outside of it a little bit. The same idea went with his halo. I did a lot of it like a sort of a sketchy coloring, and then put the yellow over the top to blend it all together. And the more I go over it, the more this yellow will blend everything together, and you'll see less of my lines. So if you wanted to add more, orange, and do it in circles, now you could get rid of some of those lines. But that gives it dimension. The same thing would happen sort of with the clothing. So I used like the green here. In the shadows I went darker, and in the other parts I colored it lighter. So now I've given the illusion of light. So wherever these lines are, I would make them darker, and then you can't really even see the blue line. So I hope this gives you some idea of what you can do for artwork and how you can show or tell the story. Share it on Facebook or send it to me if you can to show me your interpretation or how it came out. And I hope that you find that your heart is burning within you, and remember that Jesus is present while we're on the road and in the Eucharist. So God bless, and peace be with you. See you next time.